Big news out of Victoria today is that they are going to match the Biden administration and try and cut emissions by 50% by 2030. Remember, China can continue to pollute all the way to 2030, and even then, it's only 2060 when they promise to actually get to net zero, 10 years after the Western world will do so. Remember, they're a developing country while simultaneously launching their own version of the International Space Station. Here's the acting Premier today.
Call it an environment argument, call it an economic argument. Those who act early will reap the reward.
All government operations will be powered by 100% renewable energy by 2025. We're looking at least 600 megawatts of new power generation, new electricity generation to meet the Victorian government's load.
Where does that come from? Well, it comes from more renewable sources such as wind and solar. But transition is always the issue that I like to talk about here. I'm not a climate denier. I don't believe that there's not a reason to do something. But we can't pretend that transitioning from what we currently do is effortless, is costless. And there's a particular story which no one wants to pay real attention to, which is as Victoria will make its way towards more renewables, they will have greater reliability on things like wind farms. Wind farms will be set up in regional Victoria. Now, places like Ballarat, where we were last week, are right in the crosshairs of these sorts of changes. While people who live in the city, well, they won't see a windmill within a couple of hundred k's of their house. People who have tilled the soil for a long time are going to start to see these things pop up on their property. Yes, they will be paid in part a pretty penny. But once the wind farms are making the electricity, then needs to be transported back to Melbourne, which of course is through power lines. Power lines where, yes, the people who own the massive swathes of land will be paid for the patch of land of which the physical tower sits on. But all of that electricity will be running up and over the top of their farming lands. This is something that locals don't want. Let me explain. There is a company called AusNet. And AusNet is going to be putting in place a massive network of these brand new power lines that will take what comes from the wind farm, what comes from the solar, and take it back to Melbourne. They put out a map not that long ago about where these lines are going to go. They basically go right through hundreds and hundreds of acres of prime agricultural land. It's why locals who are not climate deniers, but they can say that they don't want these power lines to come over the top of their fertile grounds. They're making it very clear that they don't want this stuff. One of the local mayors that will be affected by this has said that the area that will now be not just dotted with windmills, but of course end up with these power lines all through them, a beautiful unspoilt country, and they have these towers, and it's certainly going to put a blight on the rural landscape. As for the farmers, these farms are the blood of people around here. It's their grandfather's work, it's their parents' work. It's now their work. It's heartbreaking to hear. And before you think that it is just knuckle-dragging bumpkins from the country who don't like when the infrastructure is put in place to achieve the targets that were announced in places like Victoria today, enter the objections of the former Greens leader, Bob Brown. He has been fighting wind farms in Tasmania, apart from other things, for their effect on birds and ruining the view. So it's all good to have these big targets, but as always, the transition, what the consequences are, whose opinion matters, whose land matters or not, that theoretically is still up for debate. Unless, of course, people who will live nowhere near any of these things just make a decision just to bulldoze and keep going, which sadly it looks like it might be the case in places like Victoria. So at what cost? What is more environmentally friendly? We'll wait and see.